Today we start in Daniel chapter 5, and you'll see right out of the gate that there's a new king by the name of Belshazzar. Well, what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? I told you last week that he died at the ripe old age of 80 years old, a very peaceful death, after reigning 43 years, and is considered the greatest king that the Babylonian Empire had ever produced. Well, after his death, as often happens when you have a king that was very stable for a long period of time, there was intrigue. There was a family that tried to usurp the throne. In fact, they did usurp the throne for a couple of years. And the dynasty that we might say is the royal family of Nebuchadnezzar was pushed aside. But then the man by the name of Nabonidus retook the throne, and he was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nabonidus then had a son named Belshazzar. So Belshazzar is actually the son of Nabonidus, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So we see that the kingdom has been put into turmoil, and this turmoil has destabilized things. And when the kingdom was unstable, that's what made them vulnerable to being overthrown by the Medes and Persians. Now, just to let you know exactly what the Medes and Persians were, the Medes were a group of people that lived just north of Babylon, the Empire of Babylon. Babylon was actually a city, but the empire was also named after that city, much like Rome was a city, but the Roman Empire was named after it. So just north of them were the Medes. Just east of them was the growing strength, the nation or the empire of Persia. So the Persians made a confederation with the Medes, and they surrounded Babylon. And as Babylon then began to crumble in its strength, they end up taking it over. So here's Belshazzar, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He is a self-indulgent fool. Well, he's self-indulgent because you see here that he has wives and concubines and 1,000 guests at this party, and you just kind of get from the context that it's a self-indulgent party, and he is a man that is unwise. He's not paying attention to what's happening in the empire. His father actually left him in charge of the empire because Nabonidus had left for 10 years, and when Belshazzar took the throne, he essentially had all of the authority of the king, even though technically Nabonidus was still alive. But he ruled as the king, and did so in a way that was just self-indulgent. He didn't pay attention to what was happening around him, and literally the empire is crumbling around him while he's having a party, and that's just kind of a prototypical scene, and we've seen that probably played out in other stories, narratives, movies, and books. During that time, his foolishness was exemplified in that he called for the sacred articles that had been taken from the temple in Jerusalem, stored in the house of the gods of Babylon. He called for those golden utensils, the goblets, etc., to be brought into the party, and they drank their wine from these goblets. Now, what he failed in seeing is the difference between sacred and common. And using common ware to drink the wine was nothing that necessarily elicited the judgment of God. However, not discerning the sacred was an act of foolishness. And he used these goblets to drink the wine, and during the party, a hand appeared, and the hand wrote something on the wall. And it says here that when Belshazzar saw it, his strength left him. In fact, it uses a metaphor that his hips were weakened and his knees knocked together. The hips, of course, is the strongest central part of the human body, and so his strength left him, and he couldn't stand. He was shaking, but he couldn't read what was written. And so we use the term a lot. The writing is on the wall. And that's where it comes from. Literally, the writing was on the wall. So get this picture, because I think this is what the narrative is trying to show us. Here is Belshazzar he is a self-indulgent fool. He's in the middle of this grand party when actually his empire is crumbling and the enemy is at the gate. And in the midst of that, he takes what is sacred and just makes it common. And it is as though that act was the final act that brought the kingdom down. The writing was on the wall. What's that mean to you and me? Well, I think that it means that we need to be serious when it comes to those things that are considered sacred. What we have here is a picture of the world that is self-indulgent. We have a picture of the world that when society grows to its weakest point, when any empire, any society, any culture, any nation reaches the point where we cannot distinguish sacred from common, it is a sign that the very foundations are weakening and about to crumble, and the writing is on the wall. Okay, well, what does that mean for us specifically? As people who are in the world but not of the world, we must be of those that understand sacred things are sacred and treat them as such. Well, like what? Our building, our songbooks, the pulpit stand? What are these sacred things? Well, no, let's talk about these things that are sacred. Number one, the act of sex. Sacred. Whenever a nation, a culture, an empire treats what God created to be a sacred act between two covenanted people, biologically compatible to bear children, when that act of intimacy becomes common, it loses its sacredness. It is a sign that the writing is on the wall and the foundations are crumbling. The enemy is at the gate. Well, if the act of procreation isn't sacred, well, then the byproduct of procreation is therefore not sacred. You see, Christians believe that life is sacred. Life in the womb is sacred. Life of an infant is sacred. The life of a toddler is sacred. The life of a Caucasian, the life of an African American, the life of a Hispanic, the life of Asian, it doesn't matter. Life is sacred, regardless of ethnicity. Life is sacred for the person in primary school, junior high, high school. Life is sacred, even the most poor, those that are addicted, the widow and the orphan. This is something the church must reclaim. Not just the sacredness of life in the womb, but the sacredness of life all the way to the grave. That we treat life as sacred. Well, if procreation is common, and then that which is the byproduct of procreation is common, well, then we just treat as common marriage. For the Christian, marriage is sacred. Marriage is the covenant between two people biologically compatible to bear children. That is sacred. Doesn't matter what the culture says. Doesn't matter what the society says. We are in that world, yes, but we're not of it. We believe in calling sacred things sacred, and marriage is sacred. It should not be treated as common. It should not be something that's just flippantly moved into and moved out of without any forethought. And we have to rescue the sacredness of sex, procreation, marriage, life. And what we see here is a self-indulgent, foolish king taking those things that are sacred, making them common, and in making those things that are sacred common, the writing is on the wall. The foundations are crumbling. The empire is in trouble. The enemy is at the gate. And we need Daniel to step up and interpret exactly what it means, that saying that was written on the wall, that was uninterpretable by all of the magicians and all of the wise men of Babylon. We'll say more about that tomorrow.